So thank you very much for coming. I'm Sue Ballou, and I have the honor of working on this project for the last year. And I've talked to a number of you, and there are a number of you that I'm still going to want to talk to. And we're doing a number of things with this project. My fabulous boss, Terry Burton, wrote a grant a couple years ago. And we have a web exhibit up now on the FC Mod page at fcmod.highparkfire. We're doing this series of 6 forums, and those are listed there, and we hope you'll come to all of them. This is the first, and we're opening an exhibit in June. So if anybody have stories they want to tell, artifacts that they want to share, please see me after this, and we'll figure that out. Anyway, without further ado, Ginny Sawyer is going to moderate, and Martine Carcassonne, who I can't see, with the Colorado State University Center for Public Deliberation, is going to work with the clickers and kind of moderate the audience. And together we hope to have a wonderful conversation. Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, welcome everyone. Couple housekeeping things since this is our first program. We have a lot of ideas, but we're also very flexible. So since these are being recorded to be televised, the microphone is kind of important so that people hear the audio. Hence, we have given everyone these 3x5 cards and pencils for questions. So if you have questions throughout the session, you can write those down and kind of pass them to the end and hold them up and we'll grab them. If that doesn't work and we want to just interact in dialogue, we can make that work on the fly. But do know that our initial reasoning is to try to really make the audio work so this can be a longer term thing and maybe more people can see. So I'll give you that one. Second thing, let's just find out who's who up here. We're going to get to the panelists and their questions as we go. You can read up there who's here, but raise your hands as we go. So Bob Gann, Chief of Rist Canyon, thank you. Carl Solley. Excellent. Tony Simons, there we go. And Bill, our Federal Incident Commander. So we are going to be hearing from them. Before we do that, though, I'm going to give this mic to Martine, I believe, who's going to tell you how those little clicker devices work. They're kind of neat. Right now we just have one question, but it'll help us see who's in the room. And as we go through, we may have more questions, but for starters.
Thank you, Jenny. Yeah, so if you want to just press to go to the next slide, just press it once. And what this allows us to do, get a sense of the room, and then we might, as we go, we might develop questions. And we're kind of trying this new kind of with a panel in a sense. So as you, if you come up with questions, you can have questions for the panel, but if you also have questions for the audience, we can kind of put together pretty quickly a multiple choice question and let people answer it. This is the only kind of set one we have beforehand, but then we might develop more as we go and as the conversation kind of comes up. So this first question is just, how are you affected by the High Park fire? For some of these categories might fit you more than one, so you can pick as many as you want. As you're pressing the button, you'll see a little green light should go on your keypad. You don't have to turn it on or point it anywhere or whatever. If you're pressing the button, you kind of see on the very top where it says responses. We have 22 right now, so it's just kind of collecting the responses. But just kind of read through those, and whichever those apply, kind of press that button, and that'll just kind of give us a sense of who's with us today. All right, so you have a mix there. The most often picked category was I helped others who were directly affected by the fire. That's 22 of the 47, so probably about 40% or so. But you do have people in all the categories, including 5 that lost their homes, and another 6 that didn't lose their home but lost some outbuildings. Right? So a variety of experiences of people that were connected to the fire that we'll be exploring here during this series.
All right. Well, then, without further ado, let's kick this off by hearing from our panel. We've keyed up a few initial questions, which everyone sees, and I'm going to trust you guys to monitor your time and share. If I have to cut you off, I will. But our first question really is, what made this fire different from other fires you've experienced? And then within that, based on your roles, what are your responsibilities in these situations? Let's see. Bob, do you want to start?
Excuse me. What made this fire different? Well, it was bigger. That's the biggest fire I've ever been on. I've been on a number of Type 1 fires, but nothing of this magnitude, and certainly nothing with this kind of property loss or threat to people. The other thing that I think made this fire different than other fires that I know about is the length of the evacuation. That was a surprise to everybody. Both us and insurance companies, for instance. We had insurance companies with adjusters showing up within days wanting to go look at the houses, and they couldn't. We found out, I learned 2 weeks in, most homeowners insurance evacuation support ran out at 2 weeks. And so suddenly we had a bunch of people who had no more money to pay for hotels or whatever they're having to do. So that evacuation, I think, was a key. The length of that evacuation was a key factor that made this fire different from other ones. And then the ferocity of it, the way the weather and the environment kept the fire active day after day after day. 2 weeks in, on day 14, I did a flight in a helicopter to try to look at what did we need to think about to let people come home. And that's the day it blew up, burned 11,000 acres and 50 more homes. 2 weeks in, that just is for me, it's amazing that the fire went on for that long. And day after day in the morning briefings, it was, well, it's going to be a red card day, a red flag today. The humidity's already down to the low single digits. The temperatures are going to be in the hundreds. And it kind of beats you down as a firefighter.
Bob, what's your initial role?
I'm the fire chief for Rist Canyon. In this fire, I was working with the county primarily. And we went to a unified kind of command, and my role rapidly became managing evacuation, because the way we work, we turned the fighting of the fire over to the crews that were available, and then those of us in the fire department, the local departments who knew where people lived and knew the ground truth, knew the roads, we started working with the sheriff's department, deputies primarily, doing evacuation, making sure everybody's out of the way. So my job switched from fighting the fire to getting people away from the fire.
Okay. Carl, any additions on these, and what was your role?
It's Bob was right as far as the conditions day after day remaining the same. Unlike Bob, I'm a career firefighter, a retired career firefighter, so this was not the largest fire I've been on. Unfortunately, it was a type of fire where that long continuous dry spell, increased temperatures, high humidity or low humidities, and there was no we didn't get any reprieve in the evening times. Typically, you can confront the fire in the evening times when the humidities come up and it starts to cool down, and we weren't able to do that. My role was completely different than what I was used to. Coming as a career firefighter, basically I would go to a fire, deal with a fire, and then after that I would leave, and I couldn't do that. So I was dealing with the after aspects of it, everything from the paperwork and dealing with recovery of monies, dealing with FEMA and so forth. And being from a small department, we don't have those resources that where I came from. I could just turn everything over, make a report, and turn everything over. I think the biggest change for me was I was never emotionally attached to a fire before. I didn't know the people. I would respond on a fire, protect their home. If their home burnt down, well, I'm sorry to see that your home burnt down, but there was no emotional connection. On this particular fire, the people that lost their homes were my friends and my neighbors. And that was very difficult. So emotionally, it became very taxing for me to see my friends and neighbors lose their homes. So, as well as all of the firefighters were in the same boat. So we were, it was trying to keep the crews together, the firefighters, and dealing with the emotional aspect as well.
Great, thank you. Tony.
What made this one different? I think.
Is your mic on?
Which one made this different? I think it needs to be put in a little bit of a context. If you go back earlier in the year, the season kind of started when we had the Hewlett Gulch fire, the fire that burned around Grey Rock. That burned very aggressively. We required a Type 2 incident management team. As that one wind down, we had a smaller fire called the Stewart Hole fire that was up off of ADC that burned again very aggressively. We evacuated residents. During the Stewart Hole fire, we had a small one called the Cayman fire, which we were going on. And as we wrapped up the Stewart Hole fire, if you recall, there was a very large weather event that came through. Dropped over 2 inches of moisture, created a bunch of lightning, and it basically put the Stewart Hole fire out. Unfortunately, it dropped all that lightning, and it also ignited the High Park fire. So we've been going, as from a county resource, we've been going at this for a little bit of time. So we were prepared. We kind of had a pretty good idea of how the fires were burning, the conditions they were having, you know, what resources we would need. And I think what really caught me off guard was, you know, this fire was detected 5:36 in the morning. Okay. And by the time we got resources on it, it was burning extremely aggressively. You know, like Bob said, you know, we kind of developed a unified command between Rist Canyon Fire Department, Larimer County Emergency Services, and the U.S. Forest Service. Kind of came up with a game plan to happen, divided resources like we typically do, and we became suppression tactics. However, it was very apparent real quickly that no matter what resources we had at our access, this thing was going to grow very rapidly. And I think as fast as it took off and as aggressively as it burned were things that really kind of added to the complexity of it. The other thing that kind of put it in perspective, where it was burning was pretty hard, pretty remote ground. It wasn't real easy to get to. And then when it started threatening homes, any of those areas that it was threatening would have been one of the worst case scenarios we had in Larimer County. And, you know, by the end of the second day, 9 or 10 of the worst case scenarios we could imagine were taking place. And I think to also put that in perspective is, you know, when these fires happen and they grow, we order additional resources from all our neighbors, fire departments, counties. You know, we go through this mutual aid process, but those resources take a little bit of time to get here. And so when we were going through this first day of 10 to 12,000, the next day when it was 40,000 acres, it was the same group of 150 of us. And, you know, the complexities of gathering your situation awareness of what's happening on a fire that has 5 active burning heads going in 5 different directions, that takes you 2 hours to get from corner to corner amongst hundreds of homes. And I think that part was probably the most, from a complexity standpoint and from an overwhelming standpoint, there's so much happening so fast that trying to just gather that situation awareness of what's taking place and having such faith and confidence in your fellow firefighters that they're making the accurate decisions with life safety the number one priority. Like Bob indicated, you know, it became very apparent very fast that with the number of resources we had, even though we pretty much had everything we could want initially on, we were overwhelmed. And as we got overwhelmed, we kept getting more overwhelmed. And then you didn't think you could become overwhelmed anymore. And you became overwhelmed. And then it comes into that decision of, you know, there is no right decision. You're protecting life safety, getting people out of the way. Do you protect homes that are being threatened? Or do you protect homes that are going to be threatened? Do you spend resources on the ones that are kind of burning? And you got the same group of resources. So again, you know, the thing that was probably the most different early on, at least for me, from the experiences I've had for doing this 20 plus years, is just the complexity and how much was taking place so fast. And, you know, you look into people's eyes and you could see that, hey, you know, and just have the faith and the confidence no matter what agency they were with, what department they were with, that they were going to do the best they could. And you just had faith in that. And I think that's a fantastic thing, and it's really hard to put into words or to explain the differences. But I think that's by far the biggest thing that I could talk about, at least for the first couple of days, that were different than anything I've ever seen.
Hey, Tony, before, and I want you to just tell briefly what your role is in that, but some people have come in late. I want to make sure everyone's comfortable moving around and finding a seat and moving in and adjusting. And then for those that may have just come in, you've got some 3x5 cards and pencils. If you have questions as we go, those are to write questions on, and just move them to the end of the aisles, and we've got folks that'll pick those up, and we'll get those answered. So, okay, Tony, what was your role?
I work for Larimer County Emergency Services, which is underneath the Sheriff's Office. Our role is fire suppression, search and rescue, and water rescue within Larimer County. On this fire is as the fire progresses, it starts out within a district or a department. As it gains in complexity, they typically transition it over to the Sheriff's Office. The Sheriff's Office, there's 4 of us. We become IC, Incident Commander of the Fire. Therefore, we're ultimately responsible for every resource that's on the fire and kind of the tactics and the strategies that we're putting into place. So early on, one of my counterparts, Dave Mosier, was the initial attack IC. I was the second one in place. Early on, I got tasked with structure protection. So I was the individual that was trying to coordinate the structure protection, initially in Paradise Park, then on Old Flowers Road, and then after that, more additional resources came in because I got sucked into the western half and with you. And then, yeah. Again, just the complexities. You couldn't, I don't, yeah, it's, that's
Thank
enough.
you. All right. Bill, you know the questions now.
Well, first, I just want to thank Susan for the invite. I live in Grand Junction, Colorado, and have been involved as an incident commander and managing incident management teams in wildland fire and other types of all-risk incidents since 2005, and been involved in fire throughout my career, which has been fairly long at this stage of the game, given a latter stages of careers and age here. So. So three things I want to talk about that I believe made this fire unique and somewhat different. And this one is certainly near and dear to the hearts of the Rist Canyon Fire Department, and that is the extent and breadth of the effect to the structures and homes within a volunteer fire department's jurisdiction. I don't know that I've ever seen something to that extent that was left to the volunteer fire department to take care of business, and that was a extremely tough assignment. And of course, all the supporting organizations and neighboring fire departments rallied and did well given the circumstances. Second point, I believe this is the first major fire, probably in the western United States and certainly in Colorado, in heavy mountain pine beetle affected fuels in the wildland urban interface. And that's, as you all know, living here, that's a difficult and dangerous situation. And I think this was probably the first one of significance and tough to respond to, and somewhat of an unknown condition and somewhat of an unknown effect that came into play. So that's, again, unique. The third is a level of interaction and community support to this fire. Both the agencies, the sheriffs, the county, the National Forest, CSU, that came to bear to support their incident response was well done and significant to the success. And I say success because many homes were saved, and I'll talk more about that later. Significant to the success. And right along with that is the response from the community. I don't think I've ever had firefighters walk over and say, all the way driving back into the incident command post, there's people cheering, clapping. Yep. That was awesome. You know, thank you for that. You know, this stuff is meaningful to firefighters. They spend their careers wanting to take care of business, and we're not always successful, but it's always meaningful. So I think that's the three things I've got on that.
Will you share a little bit about your role?
Okay, my role was to lead the incident management team made up of men and women from various parts, mostly in Wyoming, Colorado, to come in and provide organization, provide support. And we do that on behalf of the local jurisdictions, in this case, the county sheriff and the Arapahoe-Roosevelt National Forest Supervisor. The goal is to bring some order to a chaotic situation. And the point I made the first morning with a whole bunch of cameras rolling, you know, the media wanting to know what was going on, the role for this team is to come here and reduce the effects, potential negative effects to this community of this fire as quickly and as effectively as we can. So that's the role, is to lead men and women to do that. We had over 2,000 people at one point, and I was proud to step up and say we've got the best minds, we've got the best firefighters working on this fire. So in a way, that's a significantly meaningful role. So yes.
And I'm going to stay with you, Bill, and we'll work our way back down the table. But next would be what kind of lessons learned? I mean, people have brought up the complexity, the some of the newness with the beetle kill, just some interesting things on this fire. From each of you, I would say, what are some lessons learned?
I think one of the bigger ones, and I touched on it, is the effects of fire in the mountain pine beetle affected fuels. That fuel type is prevalent in Canada, and when it gets established and runs across those remote parts of Canadian provinces, there's opportunities to study that. But you mix that in with homes, the lesson learned is it can be a really sad and disastrous situation. And I think we knew that, but this showed us that. And the other lesson learned is we've got this situation in other places along the Front Range of Colorado, and it's not, you don't have to look very far to find it. So to me, those are two things that we need to really think about, those effects and those potentially dramatic effects to other areas.
Thank you. Tony, how about from your perspective, lessons learned?
You know, from a local perspective, in addition to dealing with the suppression with the sheriff, I'm also the wildfire safety specialist in the mitigation, prevention, the outreach. And I think what was amazing on this is, you know, we've all heard the preaching of defensible space, the thinning of the forest, the fuels. And I think it was very interesting to see the effectiveness of defensible space and fuels management. And on the other side, when Mother Nature or burning conditions were such extreme that it didn't make as much a difference as we anticipated. It was an extremely humbling experience, I think. You know, you've done this your whole career, you've been successful majority of the times, at least not on this scale, and then have, you know, homes that have done everything right with the metal roof, the concrete structure, the heavy timber home, cleared defensible space, good access, and they're just burned to the ground, one after the other. And you try to figure out, well, why? And I think from this, it was really the awareness of the current conditions, the dryness of the fuel, the relative humidity of the weather conditions, how much that played such a role into what type of tactics, strategies, and the effectiveness that made within the whole incident. I think that was one of them, and the other one that probably the lesson learned is how valuable the interagency partnerships are. One of the things that the citizens will never know of Larimer County is how closely we work together with our federal partners, whether it be the Forest Service, the Park Service, our state partners, and all of our volunteers and career districts. There are no jurisdictional issues. There are no turf wars. From the very beginning of this fire, it was interagency resources throughout. And then as more came, that kind of escalated. But I think it's one of the things that is such a success story within this incident and all of our incidents in Larimer County is how well that we work together as partners, and how the trust that we have regarding what agency you are with. It could be the volunteer fire department or it could be the U.S. Forest Service. And I think that's one of the things, and this just emphasized the importance of that and how fortunate we are to have that. And it's one of the things that the normal citizen will never know, but from an operational standpoint, it is a huge benefit, and it just reiterated it over.
Thank you. Carl, working our way down.
Yeah, I think the first thing that we learned is that we were under-equipped. You know, a volunteer fire department, lacking of funds, when you have to put hose on the ground, typically on a wildland fire, you put the hose on the ground and you leave it. And then you stretch out more hose, and then you leave that in case you have to come back and hit some hot spots. We didn't have the equipment for that. So when the fire originally blew from Rist Canyon into Poudre Park, it was about 10 o'clock in the evening. And when I showed up and met Larimer County down in Poudre Park, I said, "What resources do you have coming for us?" And he says, "I'm sorry, we don't have anything." So basically, at that point, it was incumbent upon the volunteers from Poudre Canyon to do anything that needed to be done in Poudre Park. And that meant that we had to rally, put hose on the ground, and we were all fatigued. So we had to make sure that people were hydrated and got some rest periods, which were very few. But the lack of equipment. Since then, we have acquired large amount of wildland hose, so we don't have to put it on the ground and then turn around and pick it up to move to the next house, which would have saved time, could have saved property as well. So that's number one. Number two is that communications are probably the number one thing that breaks down in any fire. Communications are always difficult, and when you're in the mountains, it's even more difficult because you have the terrain to deal with. Your signals don't reach from radio to radio. You can't communicate with the dispatch center. So we are now in the process of building those communication resources so that we can reach the dispatch center. And the coordination with outside agencies is very important. Probably the biggest thing that we learned, however, is that you have to count on your people and early dispatch. And when we had no idea the first evening that it was heading for Poudre Park, and it's because of the terrain. It was late at night. We didn't have any lookouts. We didn't know it was going to come in to Poudre Park, and when it did, it was a shock. To be honest with you, it moved miles and miles and miles in a very short period of time, and it can do that.
Thank you. Bob?
Some of the lessons I learned, or we learned, I've heard about them already. I'd like to reiterate. I think can't be stated enough how important the cooperation that exists between agencies in Larimer County and the state. How important that is. I first saw that on what I think was called the Hourglass Fire. It was up in Poudre Park. It was 15, 20 years ago. And we were nearest available resource at that point. And so they sent us, and Poudre Park's a long ways from home. And I was working in Greeley at that point, so I came in, and I was one of the last guys up there. And when I got up to the intersection of Poudre Park Road and Buckhorn Road, Don Griffith at that point said, "I need a staging manager, and you're it." So I said, "Okay, that's fine. I'll be a staging manager." And I had dozens, if not tens, of trucks coming in and firefighters coming in who didn't know me from whoever. But because the Larimer County agencies that worked so well together, they knew my role, they checked in, we worked together. It didn't matter that they didn't know me, and we were effective. And that paid off again in High Park. So that preparation, that ability to work together, that lack of boundaries, I think was a huge impact. And it continued when the Type 1 team came in. I've worked with a number of Type 1 teams, and I got to say the team that Bill led was amazing, because in other big fires, volunteer fire departments or local fire departments sometimes will get kind of shuffled out, and that did not happen here. They recognized the resources, and they used them appropriately, and they trusted us to know what we could and could not do. They trusted us to say, we can't handle that assignment, or we can. And that was a huge benefit. Just so to echo what Tony said. The other thing that I learned is that your roles change and you have to be flexible. My role changed on, I think, Monday of that fire, when I realized I had residents who couldn't go home. And my job became be their eyes and ears. My job became be at that evacuation center every day and be those eyes and ears. Imagine what it's like to not be able to be at your home. And so that was my role. And I threw the fire department to my assistant chief and to my officers with that trust, knowing that they could do it. And you just have to be flexible and adaptable, because you cannot predict what's going on. When Mother Nature takes that kind of a course, you're going to have to look around and act on what's happening and be compassionate, and also be positive in your decisions, because you have to act. You can't dally around. You have to make the best decision you can with the best information you have, and then act. And you may or may not make the right decision, but it's going to be a decision, and it's going to have consequences, and you need to move forward. And then if you recognize a problem, and this happened, you need to adjust that and change your decision and move forward. So you've always got to be looking forward. You can't be looking behind. So that was the other lesson. I think it's pretty amazing. I was sitting here thinking about the number of years of experience sitting here at the stable. It's a lot of years of experience fighting fires. And that was augmented by a lot of really experienced people coming in. And that was a big benefit. The third thing, the last thing, was that community relationship. Bill mentioned it, the support that the Fort Collins people showed. The relationship between the firefighters as residents, as neighbors, as officials, and the people here played a huge role. I don't think the people realized the impact they had on the firefighters. That was a huge, huge benefit, and we needed it.
Just really kind of bringing it all back home. Thank you guys. For folks who've come in late, if you have questions, you've got some 3x5 cards there, and you can pass them down or hold them up, and we'll grab them and ask these guys some questions. We've heard a lot about really the great relationships that you guys have between interagencies, and I think that's going to lead into this next question, and I'll just see who has something they want to add to this, because I think as lay people, and I do not live rural, I mean, I certainly know folks in this room that did, but this question of what does it really take to coordinate all these different entities, you know, beyond the trust, but, you know, Tony, you sort of talked about some of the complexities and 2,000 people on a given day. How do you coordinate that? And I'll open it up to anyone.
Well, I'll take a stab at that one, since my team was really engaged in doing that. We've got a wonderful thing that's been developed over the last approximately 30 years called the Incident Command System, which has been refined and built with these kind of incidents, various kind of incidents, not just wildland fire, to manage and support large numbers of firefighters, that's the logistics folks, build plans, and then the operations folks that are fully engaged in the tactics, application of direct firefighting actions underground. So we break it down into components that make sense, and we staff accordingly. And over time, we've built up people with experience that are pretty effective and capable of doing those things. So, and the reason we gain that experience is we travel around pretty much most of every summer throughout the western U.S. doing these things. So, and we do it because we find it to be meaningful, and believe it or not, in a perverse way, we kind of enjoy it. And you know, you feel like gypsies after a while, but that's the system we use. So you couple that then, in this case particularly, with a well-organized group of local folks that know the community, the resources, and have worked together well already. You bring those things to bear together, and you can be pretty effective. So I think I answered the question. If not, I could go on, but you may not want me to.
Well, I'll look to the audience too, and also does anyone else want to add to that?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. We use the same type of system in Larimer County on smaller incidents. I think one of the things that work really well is that people know what their roles are going to be. And if they're asked to do a role that they're not normally, like if we ask a chief to be a firefighter, if we ask, they're quite okay with that. They understand how they fit into the system and that each person is critical and it's a team effort. Also, what this really does, it's kind of span of control. The most important parts of the span of control is who you work for and who works for you. Those are the things. So you kind of know who to talk to get the answers that you need. It's very effective. We've had great success with it. And I think what it takes in is all the buy-in from all the agencies. And again, I don't want to keep harping on this relationships, but the familiarity, you know, fortunate or unfortunate, Larimer County has had its fair share of incidents. The High Park may be just one. But the last 3 to 5 years, there's been quite a few. Nowhere near as complex as I said earlier, but at that point, they were extremely complex when they took place. So we've had some practice. And I think the practice and the experience and the knowledge of the system really played into account to us to assist in coordinating that over 2,000 people during the event.
Yeah, real quick. If any of you walked into an incident command post, you would probably be overwhelmed. When you see a small city develop overnight, everything from latrines to feeding to supplies. But as pointed out, it's the span of control, and it's compartmentalized. It's broken down into these little tiny chips that get moved around, and everybody knows what their responsibilities are. But at the same time, and which I found on this particular incident, is that the team realized the local resources and the knowledge of the local area, And that became very important to the development of the plan for fighting this fire. So when you look at a guy like Bill that's coming from Grand Junction that isn't familiar with that area, and his team may not be familiar with the area, and we have the input, and they realize what that role is and how important that role is to develop the plan. But from a small department, a volunteer fire department, I think the most important thing for us to realize is you become overwhelmed instantly. So you need to get those resources in, turn the fire over to them, and allow the experts to really take control, and you have to relinquish that control. So, and Tony pointed it out. Yeah, I was out there pulling hose and wasn't used to doing that. But that was asked of us, and that's what we did, and it worked out very well.
Anything you want to add?
I think the key thing is fitting into that system and recognizing your part of it. The egos need to stay at home. You need to do the job that the team assigns you, that you can do, and play your part, because that's how the whole thing works. And the other thing is, turn to the guy or gal beside you. Get to know them, trust them, and rely on them, because you're going to need their help.
Questions out there? Scanning. Okay, one over here. I'm going to bring you. Yep.
You're going to have to go to the mic in front of you and turn it on.
While you gentlemen are on that point of ICS, could you comment on well-meaning volunteers that try to get involved?
Yeah. It is, we understand when people want to help. We understand that people have a need to help. We can't put them in some of the situations they want to be in. And that was one of the hardest things I had to do as fire chief, was to tell people, no, you can't go home right now. You can't go defend your home. Because you become a liability, not a resource. Because guess what? We're going to have to put somebody with you to take care of you. And we had a few residents that chose to stay. And they can do that up there. They can sneak around. A couple of them were there for 3 or 4 days and finally said, this is crazy. Let us out of here. Another one who had 20 years of firefighting experience stayed the whole time. But we had to check on them. And so it's actually a delicate task to say, we understand your need to help. You have to trust us. And that's why it became so important for me, I believe, to be those eyes and ears. Because in order for people to trust me to say, no, you can't come home, they had to have that relationship. They had to know that the firefighters were treating those homes as if they were their own. And that's one of the other things that was interesting about this fire. I had so many residents come home and say, there was notes on my house from the crews. Who was here? I'd love to thank them. And of course, I have no clue. And it changed every day. But the point was, these firefighters owned those homes. They picked houses. I had crews say, oh, that's my house. We're going to watch that house. They treated these places as their own. And you had to have that relationship. And then you had to make sure people understood that's how you felt.
Yeah, I'm just going to talk real briefly on that. It's a safety issue. And you also have to have, there's accountability. You have to know that people are safe. At one point in time, there was somebody who decided to stay, and they decided to go up and defend somebody else's home that fire was approaching. And when I got there, they were in flip-flops and shorts. So it's a matter of, do you have the right equipment? Do you have the right training? And can you do it safely? It costs thousands of dollars to put Nomex equipment on firefighters to make them safe. And you don't fight fires in flip-flops and shorts. So that's why we put up those barriers to keep people out. Secondarily is that we have equipment and staffing that's moving around the roads, and we had people driving through the areas coming around a corner driving too fast, and we had people in the street. We had firefighters in the street. So it's a safety issue. I know everybody wants to help. There's always something that can help. They can go down to the ranch, for example, and help the American Red Cross and do some work there. There's always something that can be helped out, but just not on the fire line.
Any other questions?
The
You have a card?
I understand people want to involve and be engaged, and when that happens, I ask them to see Chief Solley or Chief Gann and become a part of their fire department, and do that in the winter or the springtime, not in July and August when we're chasing fire. Or simply open your checkbook. I think they like that as well. So.
Tony, you've never had that experience?
I mean, volunteers serve an excuse me, an essential role. I think part of the thing is everybody wants to be where the action is. And, you know, we're still trying to determine what the action is. And I think it's such, especially in wildland fire, it's such dynamic and it changes so rapidly. It's not like your structure fire where you're contained. Wildland fire's moving, it's changing, it's burning in 360 degrees. We're trying to identify access points, escape routes, all these different ways, and we're trying to convey that information to our firefighters so that if it does change rapidly and it goes bad, we need to leave. And then they add the complexity of people trying to come in and help is just difficult. And, you know, Carl hit it on it earlier. It's that communication factor. You know, people drive past or something like that. Well, who is that guy? How are we going to find him? You know, as an IC, you're ultimately responsible for that guy on your incident. And everybody that comes to me that's a volunteer, oh, don't worry about me. I can take care of myself. Well, that's not in our nature. We have to worry about you. That's our job. And I think it gets back to that trust factor. If we're asking you to do something, there's a reason for it. We're not just being the bad guy. And I think, you know, that's the reality of it. You know, we talked earlier, you know, the number one thing now is the delay in time it takes people to evacuate. I'm a little bit off track, but, you know, it's not like us are just having fun evacuating people. I mean, there's a rationale and a reason for it. I mean, the situations are changing dramatically, and by the lessons learned, we know that people take 2 to 4 hours to evacuate. On a fire that's burning 3 to 4 miles in 2 hours, how far in front do you evacuate? You know, all these questions, well, I don't see smoke. You know, you don't have that time to have that conversation with each other. And you get a little bit stern and a little bit blunt with these people, and it's just, you know, we're not there just to make your life miserable. We're there to help you and to make the best situation that we can. And it's the same with the volunteers. I understand everybody wants to help and everybody has, you know, wants to be part of it. But I think you just need to let the volunteers, the career folks, get their handle on, and there will be opportunities. They're just not going to be in the heat of the moment.
I wanted to build on Tony's discussion about evacuation just a little bit. One of the things that was a great, I must say pleasure, but it was rewarding to me during High Park was that, you know, for 30-some years we've been trying to tell people how to prepare for a fire. And when we showed up at people's houses after we started evacuating people, after we started those notices, I found almost no resistance. People were saying, we'd drive up, well, I'm already packing. I'm ready to go. Or we'd find a note on the door that said, we've all left, everybody's safe, here's the number where we're at. You can't imagine how much that helped us to not have to sit there and try to convince somebody, you need to leave. And you need to leave now because they had thought it through ahead of time. So you've got to be prepared. this kind of thing can happen. You have to be prepared, and you have to think ahead.
I want to thank whoever wrote this question. We're getting down to it. This is directed to you, and this is an important one. How do you set up to feed and serve and fuel trucks and all those, like, the real logistics, making this happen for a lot of people in a hurry?
Well, the feeding, I'll just take a minute and reflect that Governor Hickenlooper visited our incident command post actually 5 times. He was fascinated by how we fed people. And he actually stopped and ate several times. I think he kept coming back because he kind of liked the food. So, which was a little different because the food's all right, but it's, you get by. Well, I will also tell you that hard-working firefighters eat a lot of food, and they need a lot of food. So, this time of year we set up contracts with large providers, caterers, what they're called, and they roll in, and they're good to go. They bring in a lot of food. They hit the ground running. They know what they're doing. They do this a lot. So they can mobilize quickly. If we ordered one right now, they'd be ready to feed dinner for up to 1,000 people tomorrow evening at anywhere essentially in the United States. So that system's in place. Similar with fuel and all those support functions. There's a lot of stuff going on this time of year to get all those things in place for these kind of incidents. So.
When those caterers end up being here for that long, are they shopping locally? Are they hitting our grocery stores, or they have other contracts that
they're like any big restaurant or organization. They have their suppliers.
They have their, okay.
Yeah. And they like these long fire seasons and long fires because they do it for profit and they've got to because they have a lot of costs associated with being ready to go. So.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Other questions? Out there.
I have one that Martine actually asked, but I think it's a good one.
Question,
you have
pass
another
it to
question
the
first.
end and we'll grab it.
Yeah. What do we as the public need to be thinking about and talking about the next fire and how to be ready?
I can start, or Tony, you... Okay.
I'll let you go first.
Well, if you listen carefully to the lessons learned and the preparation that's been done here locally, do more of that. Help people understand what evacuation means and do that ahead of time. And I think Tony talked about worst case scenarios, back to back to back to back. He could probably tell you another whole bunch of them. Another canyon not far from here. So prepare for that now. And there's a tool we use called a simulation. Do those simulations. Get those fire department folks, and these guys know that stuff, and they do it as much as they can, but it's really important. And you don't just do that because it takes commitment and it takes personnel who know how to do that, and it takes trained individuals to make that stuff happen. Then they're ready to hit the ground running when the next fire comes.
To kind of pigtail on that, the level of awareness of the Larimer County citizens of wildland fire is high. However, we live in a very transient type of communities. People coming in, people coming out, people are living in the mountains. And I think that ongoing education is critical. I think there's a strong understanding of defensible space, of fuels reduction. We're all aware of the mountain pine beetle, the number of dead trees. Now recently I think people are aware of snowpack, with dry conditions. So the level of awareness is there. I think we need to switch that a little bit into more of preparing yourself. Have that discussion of, if we are asked to leave, what are we going to bring? What are the critical things? Where are we going to go? How are people going to contact us? And I think it's a community building opportunity because, it's very seldom that we're just evacuating one individual home. We're there, Unfortunately, we're seeing these larger fires, larger events. We're evacuating huge chunks of people. And as Bob alluded to, that information piece is critical. Because as soon as you leave, the first thing you want to do is get back? And how are you going to maintain those relationships, the communications with your neighbors? How are you going to establish calling trees? Where am I going to go? What am I going to do with my animals? So I think to prepare for the next thing, it's more how you're going to prepare yourself, and not so much in addition to how you're going to prepare your property. Because it's very apparent that we saw on the High Park fire, there's more stuff threatened than we have resources to protect. And so what you do as citizens and landowners to prepare yourself and your property is much more effective than anything we can do in the heat of the moment. And I think just take some time and ask and coordinate with your neighbors. You know, what do you do with my neighbor's horses when they're on vacation? How do I get them out? So I think if I could ask citizens to do anything for the next one, is just take a little bit of time on how to prepare themselves better and just have those conversations.
You know, that's a great question. Besides preparing your property, we saw homes that stand alone, and as Tony pointed out, we don't have resources to surround every single house. There are some areas where we won't put firefighters, inaccessible or very, very difficult to get out, that they could become trapped in. So in those particular cases, we had numerous homes that were standalone, and those homes are still standing today, even though the fire burned all the way around their home. Yes, occasionally that does happen, as Tony pointed out, that you have a house that you think is fire resistive and it still burns down. However, everything that you can do to protect your home before the fire. But secondarily is, and I think this is just as important, there's a woman in Rist Canyon that wrote a book, and I believe, Bob, it's called Before the Fire. Linda Masters. And I read the book after the fire.
That was the Crystal Fire.
And it was the way you can prepare yourself in the event that you lose your home is to go through your home and video record it, take pictures of all your all your personal belongings, make lists, and don't store that at your home. Make several copies, give them to your children, your neighbors, your friends, and it's going to go a long way to making your life a lot easier when you have to deal with your insurance company. Secondarily, or thirdly, is that you need to go to your insurance company and have them do an assessment of your home. Our homes change in value constantly. So if you have an assessment done on your home, when your house burns down, you aren't going to be surprised that you're way underinsured. And that happened to a good amount of people. So make those lists, take those photographs, keep it updated. There's even companies out there that you can put all that information in the cloud so that you can have access to it at any time. It'll make your life a lot better off if you do lose your home.
I'm going to talk about, we've talked here about things you can do. I'm going to focus on something a little different because I think it's important as well. It's a mindset. We all tend to think it can't happen to me. It can. I don't want to be a downer. I'm not saying live in fear. I learned this when I was a young man. When somebody very close to me was lost. It can happen to you. So prepare yourself, because if you think about what might happen before it does, you would be better able to react to when it does happen when it does. So, like I said, think about what you would do if you had to evacuate. Not the tactical things, not just the things. I mean, what these guys talk about is very important. But what does it mean to you mentally? It can happen to you. So, like I said, I'm not trying to be a downer. Don't want to scare you. You don't need to walk around in fear. But it is something you need to think about. And one other thing is use off-site backup. I'm an engineer by training, other than a fireman. One of the things that saved me was I didn't worry about all that stuff on my computer because I knew it was in the cloud.
Does everyone know where the cloud is? You can find out later. So we're such a compassionate crowd here. It's great. We've got 2 questions, so I'm just going to combine them, and it's about the animal aspect of a fire and evacuation. So the questions are both towards domestic animals and what happens, but also I think a curiosity factor of what happens to the wildlife when you're out there fighting. Do you see wildlife? Are they able to flee pretty well? Do they ever create risks on their own? Looks like you have a story, Tony.
That I do. Evacuating animals is one of the first things that we consider when we're evacuating people, because we've learned that individuals aren't going to leave if they can't bring their animals. We do a lot of effort, and I think this gets back to that pre-planning standpoint. It doesn't help to call your neighbor to bring your horse trailer who doesn't know how to drive a horse trailer down a 1-lane road and then have to back it or turn it up. And then you add that it's in an emergency situation. That just is not a good scenario. It's going to jackknife, it's going to get stuck, you're creating a problem. So I think it's up to that individual animal owner to have a plan into place. It's amazing the amount of people that have live large stock that have no mechanism to transport them. It's kind of an overwhelming theme in Larimer County, which is somewhat surprising. But there are great volunteer groups up here. We've, again, through practice, we've learned that, we set up these shelters, we isolate the animals, keep them apart. The other thing that you can do is let them loose. Animals are pretty smart. They're much smarter than the volunteers and the firefighters. It's an amazing, watching the animals. I remember, a little quick story on the High Park fire in Paradise Park when the fire's roaring off of the hill. Remember the white horses? There were these 3 white horses that would just watch us, and they'd watch us go through the gate, and all of a sudden pretty soon they would just follow us like a car, and we just took them to an opener field, and they were fine. We don't see a huge amount of animals get hurt in these wildland fires. We see more troubles with the volunteers trying to get in and get the animals out in the heat of the moment. And I think what we're learning, what we're doing more and more is, especially with the livestock, with large livestock, is we let the fences and we mark them. We either put duct tape on the bridles. On the Crystal Fire, I painted them. Because what happens is, as soon as you evacuate, you want to know about your animals. And then you have a bunch of firefighters coming in, and they're counting the same horse 4 times. Because it's still the horse. It's just moved. I mean, you laugh at this, but just start thinking about the complexities of this right now. It's not your horse. You're out there looking for horse. It is. They all, well, not all the same, but... So I think having a plan for your animals, I think we've done very well in Larimer County. The ranch has been a fantastic facility in setting up for these evacuation sites. With the Humane Society, the Posse, some of these other, I'm going to use the wrong term, horse groups, the Cattlemen's Association. There's a lot of groups out there that we utilize to evacuate. And as far as the small animals, on these very fast-moving fires, I think a lot of the small animals do pretty well. The DOW's got great stories of a bunch of tagged sheep and bear during the High Park fire that didn't move. The fire burned right over them. How I'm putting that. The fire burned, and then they moved right back into the same spot. The bighorn sheep that were tagged and the bears that were tagged never left. So the large animals are very adaptive to that. Very seldom do we see animals that have been killed in these wildland fires. see more by lightning and stuff like that than we do the wildland fire. You want to add to that? You bring in words.
Yeah, that's true. They'll find riparian areas, meadows, and the larger ungulates types animals is particularly. I mean, there are a large number of smaller ground-dwelling type animals that we know get lost, but they're pretty resourceful, and haven't seen a lot of problem. You know, there are situations where cattle are caught within a fence with flashy fuels and can be burned or injured or killed, and those kind of livestock inside an enclosed fence. It can be a problem. So that's why opening those fences, cutting those fences, do whatever you can. Give them some opportunity to get out of the way is always good.
I'm going to move on here then. And I'm also watching our time, and we have a couple more. But if you could, and this is probably going to be hard. Maybe it says the lowest point and the highest point during the fire, but maybe it's just a low point and a high point, because I'm guessing there were more than one of all those things.
The lowest point for me came after an evening briefing. It's hard for me to talk about. A few days into the fire, and my crew had been running 24 hours nonstop. They had not been down. I had been trying to order them down, and they would go to sleep for 15 minutes until I'd leave, and then they'd get back up. And it became apparent to me that we were missing something. We tended to be focusing on the edges of the fire, and what Rist Canyon was focusing on was the interior of the fire. We had homes threatened, and we had not recognized the resources we needed, and we had not recognized the stress we were putting on Rist Canyon Volunteer Fire Department. And I had not communicated that well enough to the incident command team. And I went to this briefing, and we talked about the plan for the next day, and even for that night. And I basically fell apart because I said, I can't do this. I can't put my crew through another night because we're going to kill somebody. They're going to die. And some of the folks there recognized me struggling with this, and took me aside and said, "What's wrong, Bob?" And I explained it to them, and then went back into the planning team and said, "We've missed something, and we need to fix it." And that team turned around and they said, "We understand. We need to fix this. You go eat dinner, and we're going to fix it." And I led a whole line of fire trucks up the canyon that night, and my crew went to bed. But that point was the lowest.
How about a high point?
It's hard to find high points.
You think for a minute.
Yeah.
Carl, go ahead.
Yeah, you know, after the second day, my wife, I was able to communicate with her, and she told me, she says, "You need to come down to the ranch." So I quickly realized that my role on this fire had changed to more of a PR and to be at the community briefings in the evenings. So I guess the high point was every day when the Four Musketeers, the chiefs, would walk into the community briefing, and we'd walk in and we'd get a standing ovation, as well as driving down the street in the fire trucks and going to the command post and seeing people out there clapping and kids with signs, and that was awesome. I think the lowest point for me was the breakout at the ranch, and and it was for all of us.
What he's talking about is when we had to go tell people their houses were gone.
Yeah. And what they would do is we'd put us in a little room, and we'd have to go through and tell each individual whether their house was standing or not. And again, to reiterate, it goes back to these are friends and neighbors, so it was very difficult.
It's kind of a common theme with the low point. You know, I got asked by the sheriff to coordinate the structure identification and how to give that information to the citizens. You know, there really isn't a game plan out there how to tell over 300 families that their homes were lost. And I think, you know, it just took some time, and I think with the support of everybody that we had, it went pretty well. It definitely, and I think the high point was the same point, is the folks that were at the evacuation center, especially some of the volunteers, the advocates and stuff like that, pretty soon they weren't just talking to the citizens that lost their homes. They were also talking to all the firefighters and everybody else there. So I think everybody saw that this was such a hard point for everybody, and I think it turned out really as a positive, because I think it built much more community, and it gave us, everybody, the thought that, hey, these people really do care. And I think the respect from going to those breakout rooms for the 10, 12 days of telling people their homes are gone and everybody being okay with it. You know, there were the cries, there were the cheers. But yeah, it's definitely something that changed me, and I think for the positive. I think it's a good, not a good experience, but it's an experience that's really going to change me, and I think it's a positive. And it's kind of funny, you know, 2 years later, it's still, you can hear it in our voice, and it's hard to talk about. And that's a good thing, because that means that we care still.
Low point would be the day the fire crossed the river and burned up into Glacier View and burned up numerous homes. We threw everything we had at that fire to keep it south of the river. Lots of really effective aviation and dedicated pilots doing what they could, as well as a whole bunch of hard-working firefighters. And it's yeah. So but it still got us, and got many of your homes. So clearly the low point. High point, much easier to talk about. It was the last day on the fire when, for my command with my team, when we essentially what we call closing the loop, and that was when we completed a firing operation on that road to the west, north of Pingree Park, to put fire on the ground and take those fuels out where that fire was pretty much, we had a handle on it, which coincided with our very last operational period. So that was not entirely by design, but it was good. And so that was a high point. I think some of the other smaller high points, we're talking with firefighters about homes saved. Good stuff.
So
Can I add one more thing, Jenny?
Yeah.
I think the high point is that there were very few injuries from the firefighters, from the citizens. Yes, we did have the one fatality, and that's extremely unfortunate. But I mean, you put, as Bill said, over 2,000 people in an extremely complex, dangerous environment. And the amount of training and savvy and good decision that they make, and the minimum number of injuries that we had, minimum number of vehicle accidents. You go on and on about how much worse this could have been. And it's very easy to go down that path. And I think probably the high point is just looking back and saying, you know, there were minimal numbers of injuries from a lot of people driving in very hazardous situations and doing extremely hazardous work. I'm not saying we didn't have any, but they were minimal, and those people are in most cases and back on the fire lines in there. And again, we did have the one fatality early on in the incident. But I think something that really needs to be as a high point is that the minimum number of injuries we had.
The high point for me isn't a point in time. It's a thing. And the thing was, or it is it was the people. It was these people. It was you. It was my firefighters. It was the recognition that 25 years of preparation and training at the fire department paid off. And when I had to go be those eyes and ears, I could turn the department over to my officers and they could handle it. It was watching Tony telling people about their homes. It was working with Carl. It was listening to Bill in the mornings tell us this is going to be a tough day, but we're going to be okay. And I got to tell you, his morning briefings when he would talk to us each morning were critical. It's the people. It's the support during the fire and in the 2 years since the fire of the residents who lost but have supported me. So the high point for me is the people.
So I'm going to combine
one more high point. This is a little lighter. You folks are probably familiar with the Human Bean, right? The coffee place. They showed up every morning at 5:30 and gave coffee to firefighters. A lot of young ladies from CSU who were attracted young men firefighters, and they liked that a lot. But they really liked the coffee, and that's just one example of some of that community support. So thank you.
I appreciate you bringing it back up. This is a compassionate group, and there are some questions here around, you know, obviously it was an emotional event for this entire community, different people at different levels depending on how you were involved. How do you take care of your firefighters and yourselves, you know, here, whether it's 6 months after, a year after, 2 years after, because it can be a very traumatic event. Are there resources out there? Is that part of your emergency management system in this follow-up loop? What are your thoughts on that?
You know, in the last 15 or 20 years, fire departments are starting to realize the importance of critical incident stress debriefing, or CSID, I think it's called. No, it's not. Anyway, and there are groups out there. One of the things that we can always look at is American Red Cross. One of the first days that I met with American Red Cross, is the first question was, how are your firefighters doing? And every single day that I met with them, how are your firefighters doing? So, and there are counselors available. We do realize that it is a very stressful thing. You can see it on our faces and on our voices that we're still impacted by this. And you learn how to deal with it over the years. However, there's some people that have a little bit more difficult time dealing with it. So you can look at getting them professional help and dealing with that, with the post-stress that we can all have.
Yep, thank you. Technical question: have defensible space rules changed, and if so, how?
The defensible space rules, we're doing some studies now to see if they needed to be changed, adopted. What I think is going to come out more from that, at least in my opinion, is the limitations of defensible space. I don't think the concept of defensible space needs to change. Using fire-resistant building materials, clearing defensible space, having good access, address. I don't think any of the concepts or the techniques typically need to change. I think it needs to be much more straightforward of the limitations of defensible space. Defensible space is designed for a low-intensity surface fire. It's not designed to protect your home in the event of a running ground fire. And I think we all have done, we say that in those public meetings, that it's this low-intensity fire, but I don't think we do a good enough job hammering that in, that there are limitations to it. Defensible space is a tool in the toolbox. It's not a guarantee that your home is going to be protected, but it gives your home a chance. And it's one of those things, since we talked a couple of times up here, there are more homes that are going to be threatened than we have resources. we're going to go to the homes that are the safest for the firefighters to go to. Because we're doing there to protect that home in the event of an incident. So again, it gets back to what you guys do. So I don't see, you know, Larimer County has had defensible space requirements in since 1998. Majority, you know, of the homes that were destroyed within the High Park fire, it's almost eerie. About 50% were built prior to 98 and 50% were built after 98. So we have a very good test study to determine the effectiveness of defensible space. The problem we run into was a lot of those homes were destroyed by a running ground fire. Very extreme burning conditions in which nothing would survive. So we're looking into that and working with CSU to try to gather some of that data, but I do not anticipate any of the technical requirements of defensible space changing, just more of what the limitations of defensible space may be.
I agree with Tony. I don't think that in any gross way defensible space changes. I think adjustments and maybe the details of it. One thing that I do think we need to spend more time at, and this is something I learned a lot more at an NFPA conference last year and looked at a lot of studies in it, and that's ignition-resistant homes. Because a lot of the houses we lost at High Park after the initial push were houses that maybe survived the fire, but there was some ember somewhere. There was some creeping fire that snuck up on us when we weren't there. And by the time we realized it, we couldn't put the resources in need, because at that point it was a structure fire, and we didn't have the resources to do it. So I think we as a community may want to spend more time thinking about making our houses resistant to ignition from those kinds of hidden ignition sources, embers in your gutters, things that get under decks that may not be apparent to a fire crew that's driving around. That's the one of the lessons that I think we could take home.
So we're coming up on the end of our time. I wanted to give you each really just about 30 seconds if there's any last sort of comments, thoughts on this topic as we go through.
There were days when firefighters were upset because they lost houses, and so the 5 of you who lost houses who are here, just know our goal was to not have that happen. However, I will say that we had a lot of success with houses saved, and Tony's already touched on, to me, the biggest success was for firefighters, no serious accidents or fatalities.
I think in closing, you know, I was very involved in it the first couple of days, and we kind of hinted on this, but I remember coming back the second day and driving down Rist Canyon, turning at Verns, coming down Taft. And this is the second day. And if you remember the second day, it was a rough day. And by the second day, the citizens were out there cheering and had signs and everything. And it was amazing because that never stopped the rest of the next 23 days that we had citizens there. That whole route that firefighters came, there were people there every day. And I think that just says, you know, support of the community and thank you. And I know the amount of letters and thank you notes that we got from kids and all that kind of stuff left at the emergency services cache was amazing. You know, the amount of food that was left at the cache. Even, you know, I mean, and it was kind of funny because I think people saw it because early on it was the sweet thing. And then they saw that the donuts and the cakes were really not getting eaten. So then people started leaving fruit and the healthy stuff. And I'm not saying we're like the county south to us, but they saw how much the healthier stuff was getting eaten better than all the sweets. So again, I think the support of the community was absolutely amazing. You know, it's still to this day. You know, there's been a lot of other big fires, excuse me, throughout the state that the communities have not been as supportive to the agencies as what's happened in Larimer County. And I can only thank you guys for that, for working for the Sheriff's Department. You thank you. You guys kind of make our job as easy as it can be, especially in difficult times. So thanks.
My wife and I moved here in 2007 from a very large metropolitan area. I thought it was going to be difficult. It's not because of you. Thank you.
The most amazing thing, and the thing that will stick with me forever, is that, I'm a firefighter. I'm an emergency responder because I want to take care of people. But what I felt during High Park was everybody taking care of me. It was just amazing. And that's what I'll take away.
How about a big hand for these guys? So before we let you go, maybe Sue's going to do that.
Suzanne Bassinger, who many of you know from the county, has an announcement, I believe. Are you going to come down and do that? Oh, do you want me to come down? I think that'd be better. Yes, we will put up the slide. So hold on just for a second. But first, as she's coming down, thank you very much to our panel. I know it was a rough thing we put you through, and we appreciate your honesty and a lot of information that I think people needed to hear. So I really appreciate that. And thank you very much to the audience. This is a continuing thing. We have other forums coming. We are open to suggestions, thoughts, whatever. So please keep them coming. But before you leave, you need to hear what Suzanne has to say.
Thank you. My name is Suzanne Bassinger, Larimer County Recovery. We want you to help us get the word out for High Park fire survivors. Because of the 2013 flood and the federal aid that has come to Colorado, through the work of the state and other government agencies, we have said don't forget High Park Fire. And we now have money available to High Park fire survivors individually for home rebuilding. It's up to $100,000 per household. There are conditions. This is federal money. There are always conditions. But please help us get this word out to people who may have left the area. But if you know neighbors or anybody, we have the next slide shows the contact information called it's the Loveland Housing Authority is administrating this program. And we will be getting more information out, but we have just learned about this in the last month, that this is retroactive to now to the High Park fire. It's great news. Please help us. Thank you very much.
Next forum, February 12th. Please join us again. There are some snacks out front, so take your time on the way out as well. And again, thank you panelists, and thank you folks for coming out.